I never would have guessed that a simple piece of paper pinned to my front door could lead to one of the most satisfying revenge moments I have ever experienced. Yet there it was, a wedding invitation. It was not addressed to me, of course, but it listed my historic family estate as the location for some stranger's wedding ceremony. At first, I thought it must be a strange joke, but the thick cream-colored card with its raised gold lettering looked far too expensive to be a prank. The names Emily and James Thornton meant nothing to me, and yet this invitation claimed they intended to hold their wedding in my backyard exactly 3 weeks from that day. I stood on my porch, my morning coffee cooling in my hand, as confusion shifted to disbelief. That disbelief quickly boiled into a fierce anger. My name is James Foster. I am a 38-year-old architect who recently returned to my hometown of Willowbrook to restore my grandmother's Victorian farmhouse after she passed away 6 months ago. The property had been in our family for more than a century, a stunning 5-acre estate with gardens once featured in Home and Garden magazines in the 1980s. My grandmother, Elizabeth Foster, was a respected botanist who had turned the grounds into a masterpiece of native plants and heritage roses. When I inherited the estate, I took a leave from my firm in Chicago to honor her memory by reviving the property to its original splendor. The house certainly needed a lot of work. The roof was leaking in 3 different spots, the plumbing was unreliable at best, and the once lively gardens had grown wild after Gran's prolonged illness. Yet, beneath the neglect, there was the foundation of something truly remarkable. I accepted the invitation inside and dialed the number printed at the bottom. After a few rings, a woman answered, sounding rushed. "Hello, Thornton Caldwell Wedding?" she said with a forced cheeriness. I calmly explained there seemed to be some mix-up about the wedding venue. "Oh, you must be calling about the parking arrangements," she replied dismissively. "We've set up guest parking along Maple Lane so your driveway won't be blocked." My patience disappeared like morning mist in August. "No, Miss Thornton, I am contacting you because you've apparently booked your wedding at my private residence without permission," I said firmly. "I am James Foster, the owner of the property listed on your invitation." There was silence for several beats before Emily's voice returned, no longer sweet but sharp as a freshly sharpened blade. "This is absurd. I've already paid the venue fee to the Willowbrook Heritage Association. Everything has been planned for months. The Foster Gardens is a registered historic site. It says so on the town website." I pinched the bridge of my nose as a headache began forming behind my eyes. The property was never listed as a historic site anywhere. I explained that this is my private home and I have never authorized any events there. Emily's mocking laugh echoed through the phone line. "I have a contract that proves otherwise," she said, suggesting I discuss it with Laura Morgan at the Homeowners Association. "I have 200 guests arriving in 3 weeks, many coming from out of state. This venue will be prepared before I could reply." Then she hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in shock. The Willowbrook Homeowners Association? I was not even a member of any HOA. Grandma had deliberately chosen this land because it was outside the borders of the neighboring planned community. I immediately looked online for information about this supposed heritage association. I found a polished website promoting several historic properties in the area available for wedding rentals. Featured prominently was my grandmother's house, advertised as Foster Gardens Victorian Elegance for your special day. The description highlighted mature gardens, a picturesque gazebo, and a charming historic farmhouse maintained as a community treasure. My heart raced as I looked through photos of my own property clearly taken recently without my permission or knowledge. The site named Laura Morgan as the booking coordinator, with rental prices starting at $4,000 for the basic package. I knew the name at once. Laura Morgan was the president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA, an affluent community. The development that bordered my property to the south was where I had met her briefly after moving in. She had appeared at my doorstep carrying a folder packed with community regulations that she insisted were applicable to my land. I immediately threw the guidelines into the recycling bin after explaining that my property was outside her authority. Putting on a jacket, I drove straight to the address marked as the HOA office, a small brick building situated in the heart of Willowbrook Estates. The receptionist, a young woman with a detailed French braid and a name tag stating Sarah, greeted me with practiced cheerfulness. I said, "I need to speak with Laura Morgan right away." Without trying to match her friendly tone, Sarah's smile wavered slightly as she typed on her keyboard. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "Ms. Morgan is very occupied with the spring planning committee this morning." Leaning forward with both hands on her desk, I told her, "Tell her James Foster is here concerning the unauthorized use of his property as a wedding venue. I will wait." 10 minutes later, I was led into a conference room where Laura Morgan sat at the head of an oval table. She was surrounded by 4 others who watched my arrival with looks ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Laura herself looked unchanged from our first encounter. Her blonde bob was perfectly styled, her navy blazer crisply pressed, and the strand of pearls around her neck reflected the light brightly. As she turned to face me, "Mr. Foster," she said with a forced smile that did not reach her icy blue eyes, "what seems to be the problem?" The insincere concern in her tone made my skin crawl. "The problem, Ms. Morgan," I replied calmly, "is that you are promoting my property as a wedding venue without my consent, accepting payments for reservations, and allowing strangers to organize events on my land." A murmur of whispers spread across the room, but Laura's expression remained unchanged. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," she said smoothly. "The Foster property was added to our Heritage Sites program last year. Your grandmother personally signed the agreement." She gestured toward a man seated at her right, who slid a document across the table toward me. I grabbed it immediately, recognizing a crude attempt at forging my grandmother's signature on what seemed to be a property use agreement. The date indicated it was signed just 3 months before her passing, at a time when she was in hospice care and barely able to hold a pen, let alone sign official papers. "This signature is fake," I stated firmly, feeling my pulse pounding in my temples. My grandmother was in hospice care at this time, heavily medicated and physically unable to sign anything. Moreover, she would never have agreed to this. She deliberately bought this land because it was outside the Homeowners Association's control. I dropped the paper back onto the table as if it were burning my fingers. Contaminated. "I demand that all reservations be canceled without delay, my property removed from your platform, and any payments returned to those you have deceived." Laura's smile shifted into something sharp and calculating. "That is quite the charge, Mr. Foster. The contract is legally binding, witnessed by 2 board members." Elizabeth nodded firmly from her seat beside Laura. "Your grandmother knew that preserving a historic property depends on community involvement." I recognized her as Sarah Peterson, owner of the town's upscale boutique. The Heritage Sites Initiative helps maintain Willowbrook's charm while generating funds for upkeep, which is truly in everyone's best interest. She continued, "The agreement states that 60% of booking fees go toward property maintenance, as if this were a magnanimous favor." I retorted, using finger air quotes, "I have received absolutely nothing to help maintain the property. I never agreed to such terms. So where has this money gone?" The uneasy looks exchanged around the room revealed all I needed to know. Laura cleared her throat and adjusted the already straight pen beside her notepad. "There is a reserve fund, of course. We intended to discuss necessary repairs with you once you settled in. Earlier bookings were made during the transition period after your grandmother passed." Her tone was sweetened, but I could detect an underlying urgency. "How many?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Excuse me?" Laura blinked, her calm slightly unraveling. "How many bookings have you accepted for my property?" Sharon Peterson quickly stepped in, seemingly trying to calm the situation. "Only 3 this season. The Thornton wedding this month and 2 more in June and July. All very tasteful affairs, I assure you." I chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "I'll be consulting my attorney about this right away. In the meantime, I suggest you start contacting those people to clarify that you have been selling access to property you neither own nor control." I turned to leave, but Laura's voice stopped me at the door. "Mr. Foster, I strongly caution against making this difficult. Willowbrook Estates represents over 300 homeowners with considerable influence in this community. The Heritage Sites program has become quite popular, bringing tourism revenue to local businesses." I slowly turned back. "Is that a threat, Miss Morgan?" Her smile returned, as fragile as thin ice. "It is simply a statement of fact. Sometimes it is better to be cooperative." The implied warning followed me like a shadow as I drove straight to the law office of James Harrington, my grandmother's attorney and family friend. His practice was located in a converted Victorian home on Main Street, its gingerbread trim and broad porch a reminder of the town's earlier times. James's secretary led me directly into his wood-paneled office, where the 60-something lawyer listened carefully. Growing more worried as I laid out the facts, James muttered, "This is outrageous." Looking closely at the fake contract I had snapped with my phone, Elizabeth would never consent to this. She fiercely guarded her privacy in her gardens, and the signature is not even a credible copy. "Look at this," he said, pointing at the screen. "Elizabeth's R had a unique loop, and this signature fails to imitate it." James promised to send a cease and desist letter right away, but the worried expression on his weathered face revealed deeper concerns. "Laura Morgan has gained significant influence in this town. Her husband, James, sits on the city council, her brother-in-law is a judge, and the HOA holds strong sway with local businesses. This situation will not be just about legal rights and wrongs, it will become political." I nodded, already expecting such complications from Laura's subtle warning. "What exactly do they hope to gain from this?" I inquired. "Even with several bookings, the venue fees amount to only about 20 or 30,000 a year, which seems minor compared to the risks involved." James leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed together under his chin. "I believe this is about more than money. Your grandmother's property is the last large piece in that vicinity not controlled by the HOA. It is a 5-acre green space, surrounded by increasingly dense development. I think the Heritage Program is just the initial move to establish some kind of control over the land." He dug through a file cabinet and retrieved a thick folder. "Elizabeth suspected something like this could occur. She asked me to hand you this if any difficulties ever arose regarding the property's autonomy." Inside the folder were land surveys, original deeds, and documents showing that my grandmother had consistently turned down offers from developers and the HOA to buy or merge her land. The most striking item was a letter from the city dated just a year before her passing, confirming that efforts to rezoning the property or claim it through eminent domain had been denied. "She knew they would come for it," I whispered, feeling a fresh connection to my grandmother's foresight. James agreed. "Elizabeth was not someone to be fooled. She left you not only the land, but the tools to defend it." As I drove home, my thoughts swirled with ideas. A cease and desist letter might establish a legal stance, but it would not fix the immediate crisis of the Thornton wedding planned in only 3 weeks. Something told me Laura Morgan would not back down easily. She had too much at stake in this plan, both financially and for her reputation. Back at the house, I looked over the grounds through new eyes, seeing it not only as my grandmother's cherished home, but as a prized piece of property others were scheming to control. The gardens, even in their current untended state, were breathtaking. Spring bulbs pushed chaotically through the earth. Amid the stunning abundance, the gazebo, although in need of a fresh coat of paint, stood elegantly at the heart of what had once been a rose garden. I could see why brides would be attracted to this location, but that did not grant anyone the right to trespass or make money from my land without permission. As dusk settled, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, thinking over my next steps. My thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a worn-out blue pickup truck pulling into my driveway. A tall, lean man in his 70s stepped out, moving with the careful grace of someone used to physical work. I recognized James Jenkins, my grandmother's groundskeeper, who had retired just before her passing. "Heard you were having some trouble with the Morgan woman," he called as he neared the porch. News traveled quickly in small towns. "Mind if I join you?" I motioned to the empty seat beside me, and James settled in with a satisfied grunt. "Your grandmother would be turning in her grave if she knew what they were trying to do," he said straight away. "I've been watching them circle this place like vultures for years." James declined my offer of bourbon, but accepted a glass of water. "They started small," he went on. "At first, it was just remarks about the height of the grass or branches crossing the property line. Then came the letters about community standards and how the gardens should be shared resources." Walter's weathered face twisted with disgust. "Your grandmother told Laura to pound sand in those exact words. I was standing right here when she said it." I could not help but grin, imagining my gentle yet fiercely independent grandmother delivering that line. Now they have taken it a step further by forging her signature and selling access to the property. I wondered aloud what I should do about the Thornton wedding scheduled in 3 weeks. Walter took a thoughtful sip of water. "Well, it seems to me you have 3 choices. 1, you let it happen, let them hold the wedding, and fight the bigger battle later. 2, you get your lawyer to stop it and handle the consequences of a disappointed bride and her 200 guests. Or 3, his eyes sparkled with mischief, you find a clever way to make sure no one wants their fancy wedding here." I raised a curious eyebrow at this third option. "What are you thinking?" Walter laughed. "Your grandmother always said, sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to be spectacularly unreasonable yourself. Make it unforgettable." Over the next hour, Walter updated me on the local politics I had missed during my time away. Emily Morgan had turned the once manageable Willowbrook Estates HOA into her own fiefdom, using increasingly harsh rules to push out homeowners who challenged her plans or questioned her control. The Heritage Sites program began with legitimately registered historic buildings whose owners had agreed willingly. He took part, but as the program became more lucrative, additional properties were included without proper authorization, always justified by the same reason of protecting the community's character while raising money that seemed to vanish into administrative fees. Most people felt too intimidated to resist. Walter explained that Laura's husband could make life challenging for local businesses by selectively enforcing city regulations. His social connections encompassed every influential figure in town, and they united to support him. He emptied his glass of water and stood up to leave. "Your grandmother taught me something valuable. Bullies keep control only when others are scared to oppose them, and Elizabeth Foster's grandson should not fear someone like Laura Morgan." As his truck disappeared down the driveway, I felt a renewed determination. I wasn't just going to protect my land, I would create such a striking example of Laura's overreach that she would never dare attempt this again. The following morning, a reply to the cease and desist letter arrived, not from Laura herself, but from the Homeowners Association's lawyer. The carefully crafted message confirmed my property ownership while insisting the heritage site's agreement remained valid because of my grandmother's signature. It warned that any interference with scheduled events would lead to legal action for contract violation and damages. James called to talk about what to do next, but I already had a plan. I was developing a plan that demanded exact timing and a touch of drama. I advised him to hold off on responding. I had an idea that could resolve this issue more efficiently than going through a courtroom fight. My initial move was research. I spent countless hours online gathering every piece of information about Emily Thornton, the bride who unknowingly became part of Laura's plot. Social media showed that she was a local real estate agent working at the same firm managing the majority of Willowbrook Estate's property deals. Her fiancé, James Caldwell, was a developer whose company constructed the newest section of the community. The links were becoming obvious. This wedding was not simply a ceremony, it was a social and business union between families deeply woven into Laura's sphere of influence. It was clear why she was so eager to see it happen. Next, I reached out to various local businesses, making sure to avoid those closely connected to the HOA. I scheduled meetings, shared my situation, and was amazed at how many people were willing to assist once they understood the truth. Walter had been right. There was a strong undercurrent of resentment towards Laura's methods lurking beneath Willowbrook's perfect facade. By week's end, I had gathered everything necessary for what my grandmother would have called a calculated display of consequences. On the Saturday before the wedding, I was fully prepared. I intentionally stayed silent on the radio with everyone involved. Laura and the HOA's lawyer letting them believe I could be shaken by their legal warnings precisely at 7:30 in the morning, just late enough to comply with the town's noise rules, but early enough to capture full attention. 3 large trucks rumbled up my driveway. The first carried a company specializing in portable toilets, whose crew began skillfully setting up 20 bright blue units in a tidy row along my front lawn. The second truck delivered a pest control firm, whose workers started placing large yellow signs warning about ongoing pest treatments around the property's edge. The third and most striking belonged to Johnson's Demolition and Excavation, complete with a small bulldozer resting on a trailer. I had already informed my closest neighbors about the disturbance, honestly explaining that I was making major changes to my landscaping. Most showed understanding once they learned about the HOA's excessive interference. It seemed Laura had few allies due to her forceful approach. As workers, clad in high-visibility vests, swarmed across my yard, I noticed curtains flickering in several Willowbrook Estates homes visible from my backyard. It took less than half an hour for the first curious neighbors to gather on the sidewalk, and exactly 45 minutes for a sleek silver Mercedes to screech into my driveway. Elizabeth Morgan appeared like a storm cloud taking human shape, dressed in designer attire. Sunglasses were pushed up into her perfectly highlighted hair as she wore what looked like tennis attire, though I had never actually seen her play. "What is going on here?" Elizabeth demanded, gesturing wildly at the activity surrounding us. I smiled politely, clipboard in hand, checking off tasks on my list. "Good morning, Laura. We are just preparing the property for some major renovations. The entire backyard is being redesigned with new drainage, excavation for a koi pond, and complete replanting." I motioned towards the bulldozer being unloaded from the trailer. "We are starting bright and early on Monday morning." Laura's expression went through an intriguing mix of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning horror. "Monday? You can't possibly be serious. The Thornton-Caldwell wedding is next Saturday." I put on a look of innocent puzzlement. "A wedding? Oh, you must mean the event you scheduled on my property without my permission." I nodded. "I suppose this does interfere with that, doesn't it?" I tapped my chin thoughtfully. "Terrible timing, but Since I never agreed to host any wedding and this is my private property, I am free to make whatever improvements I see fit. By the way, those portable toilets are for the work crew. They will be here for at least 3 weeks." As if on cue, Emily Thornton's car pulled in just behind Laura's, the bride-to-be leaping out with her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "What is going on here?" she exclaimed, her eyes darting nervously between the portable toilets and pest control notices. "I just received calls from 3 separate neighbors," Laura said, her voice shaking as she struggled to stay composed. "Emily, dear, there appears to be a small mix-up with Mr. Foster concerning the Heritage Sites program. I am confident we can find a solution," she said, lowering her voice as she addressed me. "Please be reasonable, James. We can talk about compensation or some form of arrangement," she added. I shook my head, keeping my tone courteous but firm. "There is no confusion, Laura. You forged my grandmother's signature and have been granting access to my land without my consent. I have decided that instead of initiating legal proceedings for fraud, trespassing, and misrepresentation, I will simply assert my right to make improvements to my property as I deem necessary." Turning to Emily, whose mascara was already smudging. From tears, I said, "Miss Thornton, I am truly sorry you have been caught in the middle of this. You should understand that Laura never had permission to offer my land as a venue. Whatever money you paid for this location was obtained through deception." Emily stared at Laura, disbelief quickly turning to anger. "You told me everything was set, that the new owner honored all existing reservations." Laura's facade crumbled further. "It is just a minor misunderstanding. Mr. Foster is being difficult over a technicality," she muttered. The interruption came unexpectedly. "Forgery is not a mere technical detail, Laura, nor is fraud." I pulled out my phone and showed Emily the forged document featuring my grandmother's signature. This was supposedly signed when my grandmother was in hospice care, barely aware of anything. The Homeowners Association has been collecting venue fees from my property without my knowledge or approval. I have never received a single cent of that money." Emily's face turned pale as she realized the full consequences. "I paid $8,000 for this venue. The rentals, the catering, the flowers. Everything was planned around this garden setting. Where am I supposed to find another location within 7 days?" Her voice grew louder with every word, drawing the attention of workers and a growing crowd of onlookers. Laura grabbed Emily's arm, attempting to lead her aside. "Let's talk privately. I'm sure we can find an alternative." But Emily shrugged her off. Years of wedding planning stress had sharpened her focus into pure anger aimed directly at Laura Morgan. "You promised me the most beautiful venue in Willowbrook. You showed me the pictures, you took care of everything, and now you're saying it was all a lie?" Emily was practically yelling now, her voice carrying clearly to the neighbors standing at the edge of the property. Laura's efforts to calm her only seemed to ignite her fury. 200 guests, Emily said, some flying in from California? Where are they supposed to go? Your backyard? The suggestion seemed to horrify Laura, who had her own painstakingly prepared plans. The landscaped yet modestly sized property was certainly not designed for a grand wedding. I stepped back, letting the situation unfold without intervening. More vehicles were arriving now, Emily's mother, her wedding coordinator, and several friends drawn by urgent text messages. The peaceful Saturday morning had turned into exactly the kind of public drama Laura Morgan would have gone to great lengths to avoid. With each new arrival, the story spread. How the HOA president had sold access to the land she did not control, how she had forged an elderly woman's signature, how the wedding venue was actually non-existent. Witnessing Laura's carefully built authority crumble in real time was admittedly gratifying, yet I felt sincere sympathy for Emily and her fiancé, who appeared moments later looking utterly shocked as the chaos peaked. With Emily sobbing, her mother demanding refunds, and Laura desperately trying to regain control of the narrative, I quietly approached James Caldwell, the groom. "Mr. Caldwell, may I have a word in private?" I guided him away from the crowd to the relative calm of the front porch. "I want to be clear. My issue is with Laura Morgan and the HOA, not with you or your fiancé. You both are innocent victims in this mess." James ran his hand through his hair, the image of a man watching his wedding dreams fall apart in real time. "What do you advise we do? Emily has been planning this for over a year." I gave a slight smile. "Actually, I have some ideas. Here is an idea. If you are interested, I know the owner of Willow Creek Lodge. They had a cancellation for the next Saturday because a corporate event fell through. The venue is available, including their gardens and ballroom. It is not the same setting, but it is stunning in its own way." James looked at me in disbelief and asked how I knew about this. I shrugged and said I made some calls when I realized this confrontation was unavoidable. "I did not want your wedding to suffer because of my disagreement with the HOA. I handed him a business card with the lodge manager's contact details. "They are expecting your call, and since they are as unhappy with Laura's behavior as I am, they are offering a generous discount." James looked at me for a long time, then reached out his hand. He said, "Thank you, this is surprisingly kind of you." I shook his hand firmly and replied, "Consider it a wedding gift, and maybe a reminder that not everyone in Willowbrook acts like Laura does." As James went back to Emily with this possible option, I noticed Walter Jenkins had joined the crowd watching. He was smiling widely and gave me a thumbs up from behind Laura's back. The dramatic scene had done exactly what I wanted: a public reveal of Laura's tactics that could not be ignored or dismissed as just a private argument. The consequences were quick and significant. By the afternoon, the local social media groups were buzzing with the story, along with photos, portable restrooms, and pest control notices. Several other property owners stepped forward, sharing similar experiences of feeling pressured to join the Heritage Sites program, although none reported outright falsification. The HOA board called an urgent meeting where Laura faced tough questions regarding the program's finances. The booking fees, totaling nearly $50,000 over the last year, had been funneled into an administrative account, which covered expenses such as clubhouse renovations and a lavish appreciation dinner for the board. James Harrington called on Sunday, laughing as he delivered the update. The HOA board has placed Laura on administrative leave while an investigation is underway. They are issuing formal apologies to all participants in the Heritage Sites program and offering complete refunds. He paused, enjoying the next piece of news. The City Council, which includes Laura's husband, has officially confirmed that your property remains outside HOA authority, without any heritage designation, unless you decide to pursue one. I smiled, imagining Laura's husband distancing himself from her plans to protect his political future and Emily's wedding. I inquired about relocating to Willow Creek Lodge, and from what I hear, the move was smooth with little trouble. The lodge owner is apparently thrilled about the last-minute reservation and the exposure it brings, even providing a complimentary champagne toast for all guests. James's tone became more solemn. "You managed this well." "Quite impressively, James. Your grandmother would have admired both your strength and your empathy toward the innocent parties involved." Coming from someone who had known Elizabeth Foster for many years, this was truly significant praise. I expressed my gratitude and ended the call feeling a burden lift from me. The property was safe. Laura's excessive interference had been revealed, and even the wedding would continue without disturbance, just not on my land. By Monday morning, most of the dramatic parts of my protest had been removed. The portable restrooms were taken away, and the pest control signs were down. I held on to the demolition machinery a little longer, partly because I genuinely wanted to improve the landscaping, and also as a clear signal that I was not to be messed with. While I was going over plans with the excavation supervisor, a modest sedan pulled up the driveway. Sarah Peterson got out looking much less refined than at the HOA meeting. "Mr. Foster," she called, walking over with obvious nervousness. I invited her to the porch, where she declined my offer of coffee but seemed thankful to sit. She said she wanted me to know that most of the board members were unaware that Laura was adding properties without approval. "We believed all the participants had willingly joined the heritage program," she explained, twisting her hands in her lap, clearly uneasy. When concerns about certain properties were raised, Laura reassured us that everything was fine. The forgery, which was entirely her doing and not a board action, was thoroughly documented. I studied her face, noticing what seemed like sincere regret. I asked, "And the money? Were you aware of where the booking fees were going?" Elizabeth winced. We had been told that the funds were kept in escrow for property maintenance after deducting administrative expenses. It was not until yesterday's emergency meeting that we saw the actual accounts. She shook her head slowly. 90% was classified as administrative, with only 10% set aside for the properties themselves, and even that amount had not been distributed. She straightened her shoulders and looked me in the eye. She said, "I have resigned from the board. Several others have done the same. We are recommending a complete overhaul of the HOA leadership with proper checks and balances." I nodded, appreciating her honesty. I asked, "What will happen to Laura?" Her expression grew firmer. She said, "There is talk of criminal charges for the forgery and misappropriation of funds. At a minimum, she is finished in Willowbrook. Her husband is under scrutiny for what he knew, and her real estate license is being reviewed." She began to leave, but hesitated. "Your grandmother was respected in this community, Mr. Foster. What Laura did by using her name and property without permission was wrong. I should have asked more questions." With that, she returned to her car, the first of several board members who would make similar journeys of apology in the days ahead. On the Saturday that followed, Emily and James exchanged their vows at Willow Creek Lodge, surrounded by 200 guests. I found myself in my grandmother's gardens, my hands buried in rich soil as I planted the first of many rose bushes destined to revive the estate to its former splendor. Walter Jenkins had come out of retirement to assist, bringing cuttings he had preserved from Elizabeth's original plants. "You know," he said as we worked side by side, "your grandmother always believed gardens taught patience and consequences. Plant the right seeds, care for them well, and in time you harvest the beauty you've sown. It's much the same with people." I smiled, brushing dirt off my hands and surveying the grounds that had now been firmly protected from those who sought to take advantage. She was truly a wise woman, I agreed. Now, everyone in Willowbrook knows that her grandson inherited more than just land. Walter laughed, his weathered face lighting up with genuine amusement. "Indeed, they do. Between the porta-potties and the bulldozer, I'd say you left quite an impression that will not be forgotten any time soon." In the distance, we saw new signs going up at the entrance of Willowbrook Estates, proclaiming the newly elected homeowners. Association Board and their pledge to open and respectful community leadership. As spring gave way to summer, the gardens began their gradual transformation. The revival of life began with the gazebo receiving a new layer of paint. The pathways were cleared and freshly graveled, and the first roses appeared in breathtaking abundance. Laura Morgan and her husband sold their home in Willowbrook Estates and relocated to Florida, their move accelerated by the legal repercussions of her deeds. a probation term lasting 2 years for fraud and forgery, accompanied by significant financial fines. The Heritage Sites program was dissolved, succeeded by a voluntary historical registry featuring clear rules and transparent financial oversight. In an unexpected turn, Emily and James sent me a thank you card, along with a bottle of pricey champagne following their honeymoon. "Thank you for saving our wedding and uncovering the truth," the note said. "The lodge was perfect, and everyone agreed the drama created a far better story than a typical ceremony." Included was a wedding photo showing the joyful couple in the gardens of Willow Creek, not seeming at all distressed by their last-minute change of venue. I placed the picture on my mantel as a reminder that the road to justice can lead to surprising outcomes. A year later, once the gardens were fully revived and the house renovations finished, I held a garden party for the neighbors, including many from Willowbrook Estates who once regarded my property with jealousy or bitterness. Under twinkling lights hung among ancient oak trees, with soft music playing and the rose scent filling the evening air, even former HOA members joined in celebration. The board members expressed how perfect it felt to see the Foster property brought back to its original splendor. "Your grandmother would be proud," James said to me as we observed guests strolling along the gently lit pathways, "not only because of the gardens, but for the way you defended her legacy." I lifted my glass in a quiet salute to Elizabeth Foster, whose vision and inner strength had guided me even when she was no longer here. Ultimately, the wedding that never took place led to something far more valuable, a genuine gathering of community built on respect instead of pressure or deceit. And if from time to time a bride were to ask me about hosting a properly organized and sincere wedding in these stunning gardens, that would be completely my decision, made with my full agreement and without a single portable restroom or bulldozer anywhere near the site.